Hi, my name is Victoria Findlay Wolfe and I'm a licensed designer with Sizzix. Today we are looking at diamond point. There are a lot of different parts to this that I'm going to carefully walk you through it. I want you to realize that this quilt that we have behind me here, the pattern for this is in the packaging. So all the little tips and everything, the video is going to help you through that, and all the information is in the packaging. So don't forget to refer back and forth between the packaging information and what I'm showing you today. I'm going to go ahead, my center block on this is just a square, so I actually cut my scraps to kind of fit pretty close, just scrappy bits to lay over the shape. And then I'm going to do my orange diamonds as well. So my diamonds are off to the side. I'm going to go ahead and lay these on. And then I have my corners, which I'm going to need multiple pieces of. So I like to just line up my scrap this way and check that I'm covering the shape that I need it, and I can zigzag the fabric back and forth. Again, I'm always making sure that I'm not cutting more than 8 layers at a time. So right at the minute I have 3 of my gray and I have 3 of my orange fabrics there. So I'm good to go. I'm going to take my die. We're using the Big Shot Plus today with this, and also will work on the Big Shot Pro machine. I'm going to go ahead and I have my tray here, my cutting pad, one on top. Go ahead and roll my pieces through. I have some of my parts already laid out here, so let's go ahead and look at the construction on this. So you're going to be learning partial seams and also sewing some angles to get good points. So let's look at how that's going to go together. So for starters, I'm going to put my the orange and the purple together, putting 2 of my diamond sections. And what I want to show you in particular, the pieces are already dog-eared for ease of construction, okay? But what I really want you to be clear on, what you're looking at, is where you're sewing and where you're lining up the fabrics. So when I put my raw edges together, if I'm putting this underneath my sewing machine, and if this is my needle, when I put my needle into the fabric, I want to make sure that I have 2 layers of fabric underneath it. So this inner point on my diamond is what sits with my raw edge. Now this works with any of your patchworks where you're going to have a dog ear that overlaps. You are looking for where a 1/4 inch from your raw edge coming in this way, where your needle is going to land. That helps you to just determine where this purple fabric and this orange fabric are intersecting is exactly where you need to line that up. So that's for this end. Now let's look at the back end of this. We're going to spin this around so you can see it. You have a little purple dog ear that's showing up on this side. We're looking again, we're lining up from the raw edge to the inside your 1/4 inch seam where you have 2 layers of fabric, because that's where your needle needs to end. You need to have fabric underneath your needle. You'll notice that on this end you see the dog ear. On the beginning end, it's underneath. There's the red dog ear showing up. So that's your proper placement. So if you go ahead and you're lining those up accurately, you're always going to have a really nice point on in the inside. Okay, so let's go ahead and sew that together. So I do a little back stitch when I start sewing there. And I will also at the end. I like to do that. I don't like to have to go back and repair a seam if the seam pulls out. So I'm going to press my seam to the purple side on this one. So if I'm doing the same thing on the other side, when I get this one sewn together, that means those seams will nestle really nicely together. Okay, so let's just look at this one more time. This time I don't have the line for you to see, but you can tell I'm lining it up the front edge, the corner of my diamond, up with the orange raw edge of my fabric. These raw edges are together. There's that little orange dog ear that appears on this side, because that's exactly where I'm going to sew, where I have 2 layers of fabric from the inside to the outside. I can come back here and look at the segment in which I'm sewing together. Okay, so now we're going to make these 2 right sides together. And how do we get that nice little point to line up in the inside? This is how I do that. When I pin a 1/4 inch through my seam. So between the orange and the purple, I have my pin coming directly through the seam at a 1/4 inch. That's my sewing line. And I'm also going to do that 1 layer at a time and do that to the bottom layer. So now again, I'm putting this pin through the second layer I do those individually. Often I'll see people try to line them up all at once and put the pin directly through it, and then they'll sew it and they didn't line up quite as lovely as you'd like them to. So if I do it one layer at a time, I know that I'm pinning it exactly where I want that seam to live. So keeping the pin nice and straight, then I can bend it back and hold that in place. Now, the same thing that we were looking at when we put the diamonds together is the same thing that's going to happen when you put these little rows together. There's my purple dog ear. Okay, here's my raw edge. I'm overlapping my fabrics. The purple is intersecting with my orange at 1/4 inch. That's exactly where my needle is going to land. I can go ahead and put a pin in there if I want to hold that. And then I'm going to come to the back side. Again, my raw edges are together. This time that little point is right there visible on this end and lining up with the orange. And I'm going to put a pin in that. Now I can go ahead and sew my seam. Now as I come to that middle pin where I'm having those two seams that crisscross and match up, where I've pinned that exactly where I want them to live, I can sew up to my pin. Don't take that pin out too early or those seams are going to move. Or if you're comfortable, you could also sew up to the pin and just hand crank it over your pin so that you don't hit it. Then take it out. I guarantee you that as soon as you pull that out too soon, those seams are going to move and you're going to find that they don't line up when you open it up. Again, I'm just letting the feed dogs take the fabric through the machine. Makes for a nice flat construction. So there's my 2 units sewn together and I have a very perfect little match seam going on in the inside there. Now when I press this, I'm going to want to press this seam open in the inside. I'm going to finger press it for today. So now we're going to sew on our corners. And then we're going to talk about how to sew all these units together. So when we put this guy on, again, right sides together, I have the dog ear already lined up, do my back stitch. I make sure to line up again the placement on the back side and make sure that that's laying where it's supposed to, and allowing the feed dogs to take the fabric through and not letting go where the fabric needs to lay at the end of the block. Okay, so I've pressed my seams open. All of those on the diagonal will help make the block lay nice and flat when we're sewing this together. So let's look at where the seams on this block is actually going to go together. So we're going to start by sewing, taking the center square and sewing one of these units right sides together. But when we're sewing that, we're going to lay the unit on there and we're going to sew about 3/4 of the way down, and then we're going to stop. Let's just start with that. So I line up my beginning end, and I'm having my block lay nice and flat so that I can sew down about 3/4 of the way. Okay, I don't need to back stitch at that point. I'm just going to leave that seam a little bit open because I'm going to finish that after I've worked the rest of the way around my block. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I press my seam to the outside. It's just going to help everything lay nice and flat. And now you can see that I have a side that's long enough for me to be able to sew the next segment on completely all the way across. The one thing that we need to pay attention to when we're doing that is that this seam and the point of this star or diamond is going to match up. So we're going to lie these right sides together, and that's the area that we're going to focus on putting a pin in place. So pinning through that seam that's been pressed open at 1/4 inch. And also the one that I've just sewn on is already at 1/4 inch, so I'm putting that pin again through that seam. Doing those one layer at a time means that after I sew it, they're going to live exactly where I've put them. So now I'm going to start from the beginning up here, line up my raw edges. I can put a pin in to hold that in its place and line up the end. When you always must line up the beginning and always line up the fabrics at the end. Once you start getting a lot of different seams together, some of the fabrics will seem like they're pulling in at a different length, but to know that you always have to line up the beginning and the end because everything is made to fit together. I'm going to take that first pin out. Now when I get up to the pin where I've pinned those two seams together, I can come up to the pin nice and slowly. As long as I jump over that pin, I don't want to pull it out too soon or those fabrics are going to move and then your segment is not going to line up where you want it to. So taking a couple little moments to just hand crank over the pin or come up as close as you can to it before taking that pin out is the best thing to do there. So let's go back to the unit so we can see. It's always good to come back and look at your layout. It's very easy to misturn a block in the wrong direction, so you always want to make sure that they're going in the right place where you meant for it to be. Okay, so this next seam, we have a nice long edge there. Again, I'm going to come around, I'm going to flip, and I'm going to pin through that seam at 1/4 inch. And again through this point, because we don't want to lose this little point on the orange and green over here. And then line up the beginning of my seam and the end of the seam. And same thing on this side. Okay, so now we're back and here's our last line. So here's the little flap that we've left undone, which means we can now sew this last piece in here. And once we do that and press that open, then we're able to just flip this top section down and finish sewing that seam. Okay, there's the next one. And now we get to finish. And so we already know what we want to line up. We have, again, that last part of the purple seam. You might want to flip it over to this side just so that you can see exactly where that point is. A little bit easier. Actually, I want that flipped over that way. 1/4 inch through this seam, and then I'll finish sewing that and we'll finish our block. Here's your finished diamond point block. Now, you'll notice on my construction where I was using two different color placements. Here, using the darker value versus the lighter value. When you look at the quilt up behind me, you can see that I've done that also up here, but I was also using different colors of purples within each of those shapes. So each of those shapes is an opportunity for you to really play up your scraps and color value. You could have a lot of fun with color placement within this quilt. You'll notice that if this is one of the blocks, 4 of these together gives you a really neat pinwheel effect. So don't be afraid to jump in and have some fun playing with the values in diamond point. It really makes a beautiful quilt.